Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, a warm welcome to the annual council meeting at the European Council on Foreign Relations. This year we organize it with the Polish presidency of the EU Council. In a few minutes, I will probably lose my Polish order of merit when I open this conference with a quote that is often attributed to Lenin. There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. But I still think it is an apt summary of the times that we are living in. Indeed, often it seems as if there are days where years happen. Just take Operation Spiderweb in Russia, the war in the Middle East, Gaza, Israel, now Iran, the emerging trade war between the US and the EU, with or without TACO, nail-biting elections where a few thousand voters determine the nearest future of a country, and a NATO ally which suddenly claims part of the territory of another NATO member, forcing the country almost literally to put up a sign, "Not for sale." These are just a few examples underlining that the old order is dying and that the new order has not yet been born. And here I'm on safer ground because that is obviously a quote going back to a famous Italian philosopher. All this turmoil in the world puts pressure on Europe to act, and somebody's already phoning in to help us. But ladies and gentlemen, from Sorbonne to Zeitenwende, from Mario Draghi to Friedrich Merz's whatever it takes, from the Danish EU referendum to the Swedish and Finnish NATO membership, from enlargement fatigue to enlargement negotiations, from peace dividend to 5%, with a little help from Daddy. I could also prolong that list, making my point that Europe is already acting. But there's still a long way to go. European sovereignty is still more for speechwriters than for decision makers. So unfortunately, we cannot make the assumption that a good start is half the battle. The most difficult part is still to come. How can we find our way through the limbo between the two world orders? To what extent will the EU be able to speak the language of power? And how to respond towards China, Russia, and obviously also the United States. It is very challenging to find answers, to put it mildly, but we have found the right venue for our attempts, the Polish Army Museum. The version of the museum is brand new, but the citadel goes back to the 1830s and was built by the Russian Empire. The museum, therefore, in itself symbolizes, of course, the need for hard power. But a modern building also underlines that the EU and its citizens should not turn inwards during times of crisis. According to the architect Pavel Volanin, the glass facades of the building are precisely meant to blur the lines between the inside and the outside. Finally, the museum is a staunch reminder that freedom cannot be taken for granted, or to quote Bronislaw Geremek, freedom is not a gift given once, it is a task for every generation. So we better get down to work, and we have a very intense program ahead of us. We will be discussing European foreign policy in 4 plenary panels and a total of 9 breakout sessions today and tomorrow. We'll explore a range of topics, including European security and defense, Middle East, geoeconomics, big tech, and democracy. It will be so intense that you will probably sometimes crave for coffee or fresh air, but then realize that what is happening right here on stage is far more interesting than coffee or your emails. You are, however, allowed to use social media, especially if you write or post pictures about the event using the hashtag ATM25. And in line with the architecture, we are also blurring the lines between the outside and the inside by live streaming parts of the event, so a warm welcome also to you out there. However, there is one plenary that we will not live stream, and that's a closed session without photo and tweets, and I'll get back to you with more details about that in due course. And talk about in due course, it is my great pleasure now to give the floor to a member of the European Council on Foreign Relations, Radosław Sikorski, and well, I guess I could also mention that you are Poland's Minister of Foreign Affairs. The floor is yours.
Friends, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Although times are grim, let me start with an anecdote. You may know it, but I think it captures the position we are in particularly well right now. A storm descends on a small town, and rain quickly turns into a flood. The waters rise, but the local priest, instead of leaving his parish, kneels in prayer in front of his church. As his fellow townspeople evacuate, they urge him to join them, offering him a seat in a car. But the priest refuses. "I have faith in the Lord. I will be saved," he says. But the waters keep rising. The priest needs to abandon the main church and climb to the first floor. Yet he still refuses offers of rescue, this time by firemen in a motorboat, who warn him that a dam might soon break. "I have nothing to fear. The Lord is with me," says the priest. Soon after, the whole town disappears under water. Only the top of the church's bell tower remains above the surface. Our friend the priest, perched on the roof, is once more offered help, this time by rescuers in a helicopter hovering above. For the third time he refuses, insisting that the Lord will spare him. Unfortunately, he soon drowns. But given his piety, his soul goes up to heaven. Faced with the Lord, he asks why he was allowed to die despite his unwavering faith. And God replies, "I sent you a car. I sent you a boat. I sent you a helicopter. What else did you expect me to do?" Whether you believe in the Almighty or not, there is no shortage of signs suggesting that the global order built after the last Great War is now on a shaky ground. Wherever we look, we see it heavily stress-tested in Ukraine, in the Middle East, in Sudan, in the South China Sea. But not only there, borders are being challenged in the Western Hemisphere as well. And here in Europe, the number of those who wish to see the world burn has also been on the rise. What they would like to replace the current order with is unclear at best. These diverse forces are united by their desire for change. They deeply and often honestly feel that the world as it is should no longer be. Little wonder then that our presidency of the Council of the European Union chose Security Europe as its guiding motto. Let us ask ourselves Comrade Lenin's question: what is to be done? With the waters around us growing, there are three major options on the menu. First, following the example of the priest, we can fall to our knees, cover our eyes, and hope for some divine force or a powerful ally to spare us from whatever threats the future holds. Secondly, we might revert to the old ways, splitting into separate camps and actually acting individually in what we believe to be in our particular national interest. Personally, I don't recommend it. We have seen this movie many times before, and we know how it ends. And thirdly, we might choose a hard way and, despite all our differences, band together as a union in order to protect what we have achieved since the Second World War. And given the magnitude of the challenge, I honestly think it's the best way. Either we as Europeans face the headwinds united, or we condemn ourselves to irrelevance. We are being told openly by our main ally, the United States, that they cannot devote most of its time and resources to dealing with European issues, because they have, as Secretary of State Marco Rubio said, other priorities to focus on. And it's hard not to agree. the only truly global superpower, has global responsibilities, and the number of flashpoints which might demand Washington's attention seems only to be growing, as is the power of adversary forces. As a result, according to the official Pentagon planning doctrine, the United States can no longer fight more than one major war at any one time. Washington communicates its position plainly. Quote, "We are here today to directly and unambiguously express that stark strategic realities prevent the United States of America from being primarily focused on the security of Europe," end quote. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced in Brussels in February. Vice President J.D. Vance said, quote, that Europe's entire security infrastructure has been subsidized by the United States of America, and added that it's neither in Europe's nor America's interest, quote, for Europe to be a permanent security vassal of the United States. Let's remember, vassal has some negative connotations, but actually originally under feudalism, it was a contractual relationship. We receive protection and we offer deference in return. And that was the deal for many years and decades. President Trump himself has recently accused Europe of freeloading and taking advantage of his country. Many Europeans, myself included, do not like what we hear. But we must not pretend that we cannot hear it. With all my heart, I hope that strong transatlantic ties will remain the backbone of mutual prosperity and security. Hoping for the best, however, simply will not do. It must go hand in hand with preparing for what diplomats would call suboptimal scenarios. We should do both, hope and prepare. Trust, but verify. With a war raging just a few hundred kilometers from here, from the EU border, and hybrid attacks occurring in virtually all European countries on a regular basis, including in Poland, what other choice do we have? It takes at least two parties to create an alliance, but only one to start a war. We may not want the transatlantic coalition to erode, but it will, unless both sides want to keep it going. We may not want to be on a crisis footing with Russia, but we will be on that and even worse, unless Putin is forced to decide otherwise. Security and resilience are essential, but they come, of course, at a cost. A cost that is not only financial, but also deeply tied to our collective psyche. There is a book written by one of the most influential Western thinkers of the post-war era, which challenges the spiritual exhaustion, political complacency, and strategic vulnerability that the author feared could erode Europe from within. Raymond Aron's, in defense of decadent Europe, sends a warning. Europe is mortal. To remain alive, it must confront and overcome its weaknesses. Yes, Europe can fall, as it did in the past, to bombs, but also to malaise and neglect, which are an open invitation to our adversaries. Preparedness is not just a precaution, it is our best deterrent to keep peril at bay. Here in Poland, we've long been guided by the wise ancient proverb, si vis pacem para bellum. Others have followed. Since 2016, all NATO member states, excluding the United States, have boosted their defense spending by 98%. This is from just before the first Trump presidency. We have actually doubled our defense spending from $255 billion to $506 billion. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, this trend has accelerated. Security doesn't simply mean more soldiers and more military equipment, although these are also desperately needed. Security means social cohesion, stable cooperative economies, and the capability to protect our citizens by deterring those who wish us harm, also in the area of civil defense. Security also means no grey zones, no member and neighbor left vulnerable or threatened by other countries' appetite for more land. Europe must stand firmly in defense of Kiev's right to self-determination, not out of charity, but because it is the right thing to do, which also happens to be in our long-term strategic interest. We need to maintain our solidarity with the victim by helping it withstand Russian attacks and later rebuild what has been destroyed. We all as Europeans have done a lot. Since 2022, the European Union has committed nearly 148 billion euros in support of Ukraine. This includes 77 billion euros from the Team Europe instrument, as well as 50 billion in military aid, and more than 3.5 billion generated from Russia's frozen assets. These are not just numbers. They are a testament to Europe's solidarity and a sense of duty. If a few years ago somebody claimed that the EU would soon be spending billions to militarily support a country which is not even a member, that Germany, disregarding its fiscal restrictions, would commit hundreds of billions to kickstart its military industry, that hundreds of billions will flow from Brussels to finance military projects. A few years ago, such a person would be deemed, at best, naive and probably delusional. And yet, we have done all this. We have done a lot, but we are still far away from the finishing line. The result of Putin's aggression will define our region's security for years and decades to come. In order for Europe to succeed, we must better define what success means and offer our citizens more than the promise of keeping the status quo. Ladies and gentlemen, our times suffer from too little utopian thinking. I read recently in a book by two liberal American authors. The need for a vision of a brighter future is by no means limited to the progressives. Elon Musk's pledges, and you know my history with Elon Musk, of cheap space travel and colonization of other planets. I wish him well on his way to Mars. Appeal to people across the political spectrum. For better or worse, humans are a restless species who cannot be satisfied with promises of more of the same. Grand visions of the perfect future often lead to grand tragedies, but they are also a fuel that drives us to action. That is why we tend to come back to them. The more often, the more desperate the circumstances. For example, in 1831, a young Polish artilleryman, Wojciech Jastrzębowski, moved by the experience of a brutally suppressed national uprising against the Tsarist Russia, spent his time between battles dreaming of a united continent. He wrote that dream up in a bold project published as, quote, Constitution for Europe. Behind the day-to-day violence, he sensed something deeper than war, a civilizational clash, not merely between armies, but between Europe, the land of the free-minded, and Russia, a regime founded on the opposition to individual liberties. Jastrzębowski's proposal of European unity bears striking resemblance to many founding ideals and institutions of the European Union. Common defense, dissolution of internal borders, supremacy of European norms over national norms, and even a ban on the death penalty. Almost 200 years ago, when the Constitution was first written, such a vision of a pan-European cooperation seemed utterly utopian. And yet, tragic experiences of the following decades had gradually brought us Europeans closer together. At first, the motivations behind the European project were mainly negative, to avoid the mistakes of the past. In the May 1950 Schuman Declaration, the French foreign minister famously said, "A united Europe was not achieved, and we had war." 75 years later, these memories have naturally faded, even as the war rages in our neighborhood. That is why a new idea of Europe's future cannot be limited to what it wants to avoid, but should speak clearly about what it wants to build. Poland's vision, which I presented before our parliament in my annual statement, boils down to three themes: a geopolitical union, a union of growth, and a union of values. A strong geopolitical union, taking advantage of its economic, military, and political potential to pursue an active foreign policy, is, we feel, indispensable to securing our interests, which of course go beyond our borders. It is a union of states which recognize unprecedented threats to our continent and are willing to dedicate equally unprecedented funds and powers to make up for years of negligence. They should also be willing to grant EU institutions the same respect they demand for it from external actors. We can't expect Washington, Beijing, Moscow, or New Delhi to hold the EU institutions in high esteem if we ourselves undermine their legitimacy. A union of growth and competitiveness allows the member states to benefit more from the greatest asset that we have, a vast and rich common market. We should give priority to reducing costs of energy and bureaucratic burdens, and to supporting innovation, both technological and social. These changes are essential for the European Union to stand its ground against non-European competitors. And a union of values is, of course, an association of states where human rights, democratic principles, and the rule of law cement and shape our common identity as Europeans. We are well aware that there is not one political system suitable for every state around the globe, but we must never lose sight of the norms underpinning our political community. Respect of other nations' right to exist and of internationally recognized borders are certainly among them. The European Union cannot and should not go back to being just a free trade area. Given the challenges we are facing, and a consolidated effort to build strong political and defense capabilities is no longer an option. I believe it's a must. Securing the future of Europe requires radical change in defense policies, but also breaking the barriers toward greater economic integration. Respect and standing in the global race are never given and never constant. Great powers of the past did not ascend to their position by giving away candy, but by acting boldly and strategically. This is the European Union that I'd like to see built. Stronger, more prosperous, and more secure. Not, as has been said, a gift from history, but a hard-won result of our unity, our labor, and our solidarity, a word we hold sacred in this country. Either we find it in ourselves, what it takes to do it, or we will become mere bystanders in world affairs. It's almost too late to act. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very strong speech. I was almost going to say, please stay in the chair of the EU presidency, basically, but then I thought, Denmark is coming up, so I'll not do that. But let's move on right away to our co-host, Undersecretary of State in the Prime Minister's Office, Magdalena. and you look absolutely splendid, one will have to say, even though you have been in the chair for such a long time. But there is hope now. Denmark. So the floor is yours.
I remember that we've met half a year ago in Copenhagen, and you asked me so many goals for the Polish presidency in only 6 months. How you will do it? Yes, we did it together. Yeah, you can clap your hands. That's the moment. I want to warmly welcome you in a very special place for the Polish presidency, because this venue was the heart of the Polish presidency. Here, all the informal councils took place. So that was really the beating heart of the Polish presidency here in Warsaw. We put as a main motto of Polish presidency, Security Europe. And we showed that we can move forward if we can achieve unity. And I think that also listening to Minister Sikorski, that there's no longer time for Europe to just sit comfortably saying that we are the best and there's nothing to be done, because the list of things that should be done and the challenges is very long. Single market, defense, energy prices, competitiveness, climate change, future of our children, enlargement, or saving democratic values. There's new era coming for EU. We need to speed up the process of decision making, because the world is not waiting for our long discussions. And we need to work closer together, closer than ever, even if it means that we have to, as a member states, commit some our own goals. But only acting together now in those crucial times, it can make sense. And I feel some kind of a sour satisfaction that the Polish voice finally, after 11 years after 2014, when Putin invaded Crimea, and we are the first one in Brussels saying that it's only a first chapter, and we weren't listening enough. We also were the first one to put so high spendings on defense issues. This year is 4.75% of GDP. Also, other member states were looking at us saying, okay, fine, we do it other way. But finally, they are following our path. And I'm not satisfied and I'm not happy with that we are living in the times that we need to make these tough decisions. But we are living in those times. The geopolitics is not waiting for us. We need to speed up in Europe and work together. The Polish presidency has shown the power of unity. And I want to encourage you here to use the ECFR as a forum to shape Europe's ambitions, but also Europe's ambitions to be grounded in solidarity and courage. Welcome to Warsaw again. Thank you.